On a day-to-day basis, we are probably transacting around 400 million worth of money, people paying for anything from birth certificates to traffic fines and so on and so forth. Yeah, we are extremely privileged because in Rwanda, there is always that drive. It's like usually you, the technologist, you are slower than the ambition of the government. And so we are always in some form of catch up to the ambition. You never know who can create what and the amount of value that they can extract out of it. They have a deep belief in the engineers, in the creators, in the entrepreneurs who are out there, who are dreaming and trying to bring things to life.
Hello there. Before we dive into today's conversation, have you subscribed to our channel yet? If you haven't, do so. And remember to share your thoughts with us in the comments below and like this video. Your support means a lot. Now let's get into it. Hello everyone. My guest this week on the Long Form podcast is Israel Bimpe. Israel, a pharmacist by training, has been CEO of Irembo since 2022. We shall discuss his personal journey, his tenure as CEO of Irembo, and his ambitions for the Rwandan public sector tech platform. Mr. Israel Bimpe, welcome to the Long Form.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm just going to ask you a question that, I was going through your LinkedIn before a few days ago to kind of have a better sense of your career path.
Yeah.
So the question I would like to ask is, you graduated 8 years ago from the University of Rwanda with a degree in pharmacy.
Yeah.
You're a pharmacist by training.
Correct.
How does a pharmacist end up being the CEO of a tech company?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I very much was expecting that to sort of some way somehow come in. But I think first of all, I've always been curious and have always had range in terms of topics and interests that I've had since I'm a young kid, since I was a teen, and when I eventually got into school. When I got into pharmacy school, actually my interest has always been into the application of technology or technology advancements to the pharmacy field. If you think about everything a pharmacist does, from drug discovery to drug dispensing, there is just a ton of technology that's used across the board. And so that has always interested me. And when I finished school, I think I got a chance to actually explore what do we do in terms of access to medicine, and how do we deploy and use technology in terms of access in rural areas or in places that are more remote, or just to improve or innovate around supply chain. And the drone technology and drone ecosystem was growing a lot in that space. And so that was my first foray into the intersection of technology and pharmacy, but healthcare more broadly. And there I was sort of focused mostly on the healthcare side of things, but quickly evolved into broader aspects of management and application of technology and innovation, about using technology to deliver solutions in the healthcare space. And so that was my first foray into technology, and I never stopped or looked back, and that's how I ended up here at Irembo.
So you talk about a curiosity and that you were always a curious person.
Yeah.
Is that something that was just innately in you? Was it just in you, or was it because of maybe the stuff that the family background, your high school experience? Where did that curiosity come from?
I think it's many places, but I would say it's mostly family background and the places I grew up at. I grew up in Huye, in Butare. It's a very kind of academic city, if you want. It probably has the most concentration of learning institution, whether it's primary, high school, university. And what that place was like when we grew up, it's like over 90% of professionals were somehow affiliated with the university. So that means there was so much exposure to kind of all kinds of things that can trigger some form of curiosity. Huye also had the only museum in the country at that time. And, any form of, if there is a visitor, if you want to go play or something, it always used to end up at the museum. So that environment itself, both at home and the city, the library, I started going to a kids library in Huye very early on. Those ignited the curiosity that I feel like I have and how it has shaped me until today.
Really interesting. Were your parents academics?
Not at all. My dad was actually a pastor, kind of started a church in Huye right after the genocide when we came back to Rwanda. My mom wasn't an academic, but was working in the university, mostly in the administrative aspect of things.
You say coming back to Rwanda, what do you mean?
So I was born in Bukavu, DRC. Okay. And right after the genocide, we also returned to Rwanda like everyone else. And my dad kind of wanted to settle somewhere where he has a bit of liberty. And he had been a pastor way before I was born. And so he chose Huye to kind of start his ministry when he was back in Rwanda.
What was your childhood like in Huye? Because when I think about Huye, it's a very sleepy town. You know, it's not, there's not a lot of action. And I can only imagine if it's sleepy now, how sleepy it was maybe all those years back. What was that childhood looking like?
Yeah, you have to live there to understand that it wasn't really a sleepy town. But so for example, where we went to school in primary, the whole idea is school, and then you have a kids library, then you have the museum, then you have all these university affiliated institutions like the university club, a university innovation center of some sort. And most of us, the children, would just go to all of these places to learn. We go to the museum, I think, once every 3 to 4 months or something. There is some cultural events. We go to the university club. There is, some lessons on geography, some cultural showcase, from Botswana, from Namibia. There is like the kids library. You are subscribed to it, you go there. So that's really what the environment we grew up in because of that fact that many people would see it sleepy, but the people who live there kind of have their own way of life. Or you even have the arboretum inside the university, which is this kind of artificial forest, if you want, which has an interesting story, interesting trees, and you just go and learn about those things. There used to be a laboratory that makes drugs out of trees, and it was free to visit, and they would just show you around on how it is that they make these things. So I think you have to live there to know that it's not sleepy, and definitely it has tendency to be less active and less buoyant, but more of in that side of more nerdy, more academic, more learning. People are heavy in their books, if you want. Yeah.
And did you do your high school in Huye?
Yes. So I did all my schooling pretty much in 2 square kilometers, if you want. I did my high school at Groupe Scolaire, which at that time was quite prestigious. And it has, I believe, until today, one of the largest libraries in a high school. It had, I think, 3 libraries, one affiliated to Alexis Kagame. Another one, just because the Groupe Scolaire used to have one of the best literature programs in the country for would-be journalists, politicians, and the like. So they have so many classics, history books, and so on. And another general type of library, quite large. And it's also a big school. Like at that time, we were 1,500 of us, so it was one of the largest schools in the country. And then I did kind of high school and another private school called the École Autonome, and university in the same place.
It's interesting. When I went through again your resume, and I saw University of Rwanda, I found that interesting. A couple of months back, I had the vice chancellor of the National University, and one of the questions that I asked him was about the perceived incompetence of University of Rwanda graduates, because there's a certain bias against the graduates from that university, and kind of hearing your journey, I'm not seeing, I'm kind of hearing a journey that most Rwandans go through, which is local normal family, local primary schools, local high schools, and then a local university, but then still able to excel and be a leader of industry. What is your reaction, if I can ask you the same question I asked him, which is, do you think that it's unfair the way University of Rwanda graduates are characterized by, unfortunately, our own population?
I think it's very unfair. I think even for when I started university, that's when all the 7 or so public learning institutions were merged into one. I think we used to have and still have some of the quite fine institutions that kind of have the right form of academic training, the right form of environment to learn. I think it's what we make of it, both as students, but also from time to time the university itself. But I also feel like it's not just about the academic part. I think there is so much that goes on into the university ecosystem, into the space that we are in and what it is that we get to use and make of it. One thing that pharmacy, medical, and healthcare students in general were known for is they are hyperactive beyond just their studies. We have student associations, and I was president of the Pharmacy Student Associations, and what we used to do is you have programs on pharmacy education, programs on professional development, programs on public health. We did, like vaccination drives across the country, teaching about sexual and reproductive health. Then we do internal workshop on advancing our education. My own thesis was on post-graduation pharmacy education. But the university would give us that space. And often than not, we would have to claim that space to create new and other platforms. For example, I started public lectures at our university, at our school. And the first speaker was a former vice chancellor of the university, so that we just have an exchange. And so we were always hyperactive in that sense. And those are platforms that teach you to speak in public, teach you to lead projects, to manage money, to request for grants, to work with partners and build relationship and collaborators. We would host a pharmacy student symposium every year. It's actually, until now, the only scientific conference for pharmacy professionals in the country, organized by students. We would host international conferences. And so your skills and capabilities were absolutely formed at that level. And so I always think it's unfairly seen. And if you want to diagnose the problem, you look not just at the institution or the academics, you look at the broader aspects of how different things run into the university. And you can think of the best doctors we have in the country absolutely went there. The best agronomists and the best electrician, the best technologists, most of them will have transitioned through that institution. So it's quite a fine institution and can be unfair, but I also feel like there is certain aspects that makes up an academic life that we have to look into and invest in as well.
You've spent the majority of your career, your working career, so you've been out of university for 8 years now.
Yeah.
The majority of the time that you've spent as a working professional has been in Zipline.
Correct.
4 years you spent in Zipline.
Yeah.
That's not all. That's especially for your generation. That's a lot of time to be spent in one business, in one field. What was so special about Zipline that this company was able to keep you interested in it for such a long period of time?
I think the first thing when I was presented the opportunity to join Zipline, it was just the impossibility of what those guys were trying to do at that time. You have a bunch of engineers who manufactured literally an aircraft to deliver medical products, and you have to overcome integration in the healthcare system, integration in the aviation industry. You have to get the citizen and the population to buy it, convince a whole government that this is the right place to start and do it. And just build everything from the ground up. There is never a supply chain system that rely on aircrafts that small. There is never an experience, a nurse, a patient would have to receive their goods that small. So all the amount of things that we had to build was incredibly fascinating. And every time you would achieve a certain milestone, there is just an even bigger in front of you that you have to overcome. And every milestone was impossible. Like you just tell it to someone, they're like, you guys are just fools, and we'll see where you'd go die. And so every step that we got to do, I think there was, after that, we can see that we are creating a whole new way of doing things, a whole industry, advancing a certain part of technology that had never been thought of, and create impact in ways that you've never imagined possible. And then the second thing is when we joined, it's like all of us are early in our career. That's what the company can afford. Maybe they can't afford, big senior directors or something. Just want young people, get to do things, and then you have to grow. Because when I joined, we were about, 40, 50, and we had to, by the time I left, we were 800. And the company doesn't grow above you, it always grows below you. And so that means you have to grow your leadership skills, your management skills, relationship building skills, and often than not step into new responsibilities way earlier than industry peers would have. And that was a tremendous opportunity to just find yourself in rooms, find yourself responsible for things that were usually like 10 years ahead of their time for you to take on. And it remained a very, very exciting place to be for that, yeah.
So why did you leave?
I think the opportunity to be able to lead an organization like Irembo was just too good to let go. The scale of Irembo and the scale of Zipline are somewhere similar, but the impact of Irembo, it's just on a whole other scale, right? Zipline is on the healthcare space. Irembo, it's across the board. Everything you can imagine, we touch it. And the ability to try and take that next level in terms of how much you get to do was incredible, and I just couldn't say no.
So let's talk about Irembo. Yeah. I feel like, as a user of the platform, I feel like I have a more than rudimentary understanding of the company.
Good.
But there's still a bunch of things that I call a mystery to me. Who owns it? Okay. What is it worth? And if you have a number, how has it? What has that number come from? And lastly, what's the impact of Irembo in terms of job creation, taxes, and other benefits to the economy? Are you able to kind of answer some of those questions?
Yeah, happy to. So Irembo is turning 10 years this year. So that means it's a company that has gone through quite a number of kind of transitions in terms of its growth and scale. Today, we have two shareholders. One of them is Agaciro Development Fund, representing the government of Rwanda. And another is an investor who kind of also believed in this mission very early on when the government kind of started working.
Is it 50-50?
No. The government owns much more.
Is it a secret?
The nature of a private company owned by private investors means I'm very constrained in how much I can share with you.
But then we can say with the confidence that it's a majority local government
company. Yeah, it's a majority local owned company, and sort of that's pretty much where it is from a shareholding perspective. From a scale of the work that we do, to give you a sense, we are a technology company. Most of you will interact with us on irembo.gov.rw, but essentially that's one of our products, which is Irembo Gov. Another product is Irembo Pay. Every time you apply, then you pay. The Irembo Gov is a service management platform where on one hand, we publish the services for consumers or citizens, and on the other hand, we help certain institutions to also process and approve and reply to the services. So we have about 3,000 officers or government officers in the background, kind of responding to certain services. And then we have the payment side, which is a licensed payment platform that allows you to pay, and there are institutions that still list their services to also be paid. Some institutions are not on Irembo Gov, but use Irembo Pay to receive payments. To give you a sense of scale, we've transacted over 135 billion Rwandan francs.
In 10 years or this year?
In 10 years, and over 40% of that just in the last 2 years. So 2023 and 2024 to date. It shows you how, like around 2020, 2021, right after the pandemic, we went through a significant scale of the products and the services that we provide. We've made over 13 million transactions on our platform. And so that's kind of about the scale of what it is that we are doing. And the transaction is 130 million and 13 million usually in a year or so. So that's pretty much a characteristic of what it is. We are about 200 employees as we speak, and it has grown kind of steadily over time to be able to manage the scale. We work with over 30 plus institutions as clients, as partners. We have over 200 plus services on the government side and thousands more on the payment side only, where just it's institutions that build their own system, but they use us to pay for services. So that's to give you a picture of the scale of the work that we do. On a day-to-day basis, we are probably transacting around 400 million worth of money, people paying for anything from birth certificates to traffic fines and so on and so forth. Yeah.
And your valuation?
Our valuation is also something we cannot share publicly, but we are quite a large technology company. That's kind of.
So, okay, how about this? Let me throw some numbers, and then you'll either say above or below.
Correct.
Is it above $100 million?
Around, slightly below.
Slightly below. Is that a good, because if you told me that if I had a company that was worth $80 million in terms of valuation, I would say I'm doing well.
Okay.
But I don't know within the kind of business you're in, within the kind of platforms that the similar competitors, because I'm pretty sure Irembo is not the only one that kind of does its job around the world. How would you rank yourself in terms of valuations, in terms of how well you do in terms of providing services, with maybe we wouldn't necessarily call them competitors, but with your peers?
Yeah. So the valuation, I think I'll give you some form of context there, both on the valuation and the trajectory of the company. Valuation is usually set by investors every time they put in more money, right? So a typical technology company will raise a seed fund, a Series A, Series B, Series C, D. They usually turn unicorn at the Series C.
A unicorn is?
$1 billion US valuation. For us, we've never raised money in that manner. We were capitalized once and kind of just managed to stay afloat and profitable and pay all our salaries and grow and scale using our own cash flow. So there is some flaws in using that model to evaluate our business. And usually investors are thinking, what is the future potential that you have and so on. So if we were trying to be comparative, looking at our revenue, looking at our profitability, looking at our scale, we are quite at the same level of scale with your typical African technology company. Of course, we are a one-market technology company. So when we start going in other spaces and so on, that can even increase more and more. So that's why, if we were to list on a public market, I'm pretty sure, most of these companies, they use what we call revenue multiples. So essentially they look at your 1 year revenue and they multiply it by, let's say, 10, thinking that that's really how you will grow. And the industry standards usually varies around 10 to 12 kind of multiples. In the African continent, it's between 3 to 5 revenue multiplied by that if it's a public company. So we are comparatively in the same range as the leading technology companies in leading markets across the continent. So that's the story. Now, On where Irembo comes from, really, initially, we used to kind of outsource the technology, if you want. The idea was, how do you digitize all government services? And who has done it before? And we said, let's bring them in, let's help us. We quickly realized that allows us to get to a certain amount of scale.
Bringing in expatriates to...
Exactly, like literally importing technology. But that doesn't allow us to operate at scale. And so now what Irembo decided to do is, how do we build the entire technology stack in-house? And so we built the first version of that product in-house that was launched in 2020. So it's a very young product. And this year we are kind of building a second version of that that's going to go live later this year. And so that also shows that, if you really think about it, well, we are probably a 4-year with our own IP type of company. And so that's kind of an early journey where we are at, and we are just trying, that we are at a humongous scale, so we are just trying to match that momentum in a certain way.
I haven't, like I said, there's almost no Rwandan or resident of Rwanda who does not use your platform. So all of us feel that we understand the platform.
Correct.
So let me ask you a hard question. Can you share with us one thing that we actually do not know about the platform?
I think it's really hard to tell. But I think one thing maybe most people will not know is our work that we do in cybersecurity and data privacy. So all the way from designing, launching, and a feature or a service or something, we have a whole cybersecurity work stream that goes into it to scan for vulnerabilities, scan for what is malicious that could be exploited here, and then we patch that. Then when you apply and send information, who gets to see it, how the information is transferred between us and our partners, and so on. We have a whole protocol of data privacy and protection aspects that we do, and so on and so forth. Even how we store the data, whether at Irembo, we process the data for other institutions. I think that part of the work is something we barely talk about, we barely kind of publicize out there, but it's a huge, huge chunk of our work. And I always say, it's one of those things that show a clear sign of maturity in the technology ecosystem, when you have the local talent, local skills, and local capabilities, and to be able to do that kind of work with professionals and engineers from places like Carnegie Mellon University, AUCA, and so on and so forth.
Let's talk about what you just said, which is cybersecurity.
Correct.
You are, almost all of us, you probably have access to most of all our private information. And not just that, there's a lot of transactions.
Correct.
So I was reading the New Times maybe last week, and they arrested, I saw they arrested a group of people, some from the region, some from Rwanda, who were attempting to use their cyber skills to steal from banks, and that they had been successful, not in our banks, but in some of the regional banks. Now, with you having access to all our private information, you being a place where there are just so many transactions, I would assume that you would be dealing with cyber attacks almost not only on a daily basis, but probably on an hourly basis. Is that actually what happens? Are you actually being targeted? And if you are being targeted, what do you do to kind of keep winning that war in a constantly changing environment?
Yeah, I think I'll add to some of those news. I think you also saw recently one of the largest cybersecurity companies in the world sort of made a mistake in one of their updates, and they pretty much brought down the entire system.
So Windows.
Yeah, that shows you what the scale. Fortunately, it wasn't a cyber attack. It was just a mistake in the deployment of a new software, but it shows you the scale at which things could be if they went wrong. So for us, I think there are multiple ways in which you think about what we call attack surface, or where someone who's intending to commit fraud or something would come in and enter. That could be on our systems. So let's say the Irembo Gov website, our infrastructure, our servers, and so on. And then there is also the human element aspect of it. The human element aspect is on our staff or on you, the user. You, the user, it means your username and your password. If the user doesn't take good care of their username and password, you don't remember it in your mind, you save it as a contact information, you write it on a piece of paper and put it somewhere in your drawer. Those are information that's vulnerable for cyber kind of criminals, and they can access that and use it. There are ways, our responsibility and your responsibility, but our responsibility is to protect you by putting things like two-factor authentication. So every time you want to log in, we send you a message to say, is it really you who's trying to log in into your platform? If you are using an agent, like most of the users would do, it's like an agent use your ID, we send an SMS, or we ask the agent, tell us the middle name of this person. But those are all two-factor authentication mechanisms to protect the person who's using us. And then usually you'll see platform like ours will force you to change your password every 6 months, every 1 year. That's a way of us nudging you into being, cyber healthy if you want. Now, on our staff as well is usually it's like they can get a malicious email, someone posing as me, someone posing as you, inviting me to come here. Oh, absolutely. As you get smarter in technology building, cyber criminals also get smarter. And so what we do is we train our staff and we put in place mechanisms to protect the company in that sense. For example, we do a lot of simulated phishing attempts. For example, I'm here, I'm busy, our cybersecurity team can quickly send me a phishing attack so that they see how alert I am, even when I'm in the most high stressful environments. And we try to do that. And then we do trainings for our staff, for everyone involved on a regular basis. And then we also create mechanisms to protect us, not using a company email on a private phone, on a private computer, and so on and so forth. So we have a whole kind of board-led approach to managing our cyber security environment across all potential attack surfaces. And we make sure that we have world-class kind of ability to detect that. And you also have to develop what we call cyber intelligence, which is knowing what is it that is happening out there. All these kind of cyber criminals have an agenda, and they're often communicating about it on the dark web, in some kind of places like Reddit, where it's a bit hard to see what's happening. It's also important for us to build that knowledge, that capacity to stay in tune with what's happening, and that can get us to act preventively in that manner and say, oh, because of this and that, let's not do a lot of risk. And many companies have protocols where, for example, a bank would say, when it's payroll time, let's not do any adjustments to our technology until the payroll period end, for example. So we have similar protocols like that ensure that we are protected and we make sure. And then also there is the regulatory environment. We have a law, the Data Protection and Privacy Law. We have a National Cybersecurity Agency. They are also our partners and our regulators in that space. So we tend to also work together to ensure that we're protecting ourselves and protecting the information and data we control and transact.
Quick question. Where are these attacks coming from?
Everywhere. It could be a solo young engineer who just feel like they can steal 100 million. One morning they wake up, they're like, you know what? These bank people are always distracted, or these telco people, or these tech people are always distracted. Let me just lie to him and pose as a CEO. I'll get access to their system. And if people are paying, I'll reroute the money to myself, and that's it.
Are you able to see the IPs? Because I in my head, very often you'll hear about Russian attacks, Chinese attacks, North Korean attacks, Nigerian attacks are quite well known.
So I was going to say there is those individuals who usually just want quick gain. Then you have also organized crime, essentially. And that can be on anything like they have wide variety of means and motivation and what it is that drives them to those attacks. And so we can see, we can tell, we usually know what is the usual target of certain of these organized criminals and groups, and which ones could we be vulnerable to. And so, yeah, and we also follow what's happening across the world. Like you say, okay, if these social media companies or these technology companies or African fintech companies are being attacked, you kind of can get to know where do you stand and where you are, and will you protect yourself in every possible way.
So you're not able to say where they come from?
I can say where they are coming from, but it's from everywhere, from many places. And yeah, it's really varied. You wouldn't say that it's only particular crime groups from this particular place who are targeting this country. No, it depends. It really varies so much. Some are interested in, the nation. Some are interested in the fintech industry. Some are interested in, government data. And it's from way various interests, various groups, and those kind of things. So, yeah.
You've been CEO now for 2 years.
Yes.
Let me ask you an easy question.
Okay.
What have you been most proud of during your tenure?
I think it's the ability to scale that we've gotten to. The first is now we have over 200 services, very close to delivering the national strategy for transformation of digitizing all government services. So every manual service you can imagine is now provided digitally in some way, somehow. But also the ability to be reliable for citizens. I think whenever you wake up, you never have to think, will Irembo work today? If you want something. So that fact that people just know that it works has taken a lot of work, and being able to achieve that is an incredible feat. Yeah.
As Rwandans, we are constantly urged by our leadership to keep thinking bigger.
Correct.
And bigger and bigger, and be more ambitious for ourselves, our families, and our businesses.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to ask you the question. You talked about being a unicorn, a billion-dollar company. What's stopping Irembo for being Rwanda's very first billion-dollar company?
Absolutely nothing. And I think it's what it takes to get there that we are really now working on. And you have to think about how nascent and new the ecosystem for technology is, what it is that the pioneers of this technology industry have done. I always think about my two predecessors in terms of what constraints they had, what opportunities they had, what it is that they could leverage, and the fact that I'm privileged to have much more, whether it's in the form of talent, infrastructure, and so on, that we can build on to be able to really achieve that. And so all we are doing is how continuously innovating, creating value, expanding the business and what it is that we do across the continent, not just in Rwanda, and so that we can be in a position to create that unicorn worth kind of value across there in the business that we do.
Maybe here's a question. For what you do, is it actually even possible to become a unicorn simply because you can only go as far as the government allows you to go? Mm-hmm. Right now, you're in Rwanda, and you're able to go far because the Rwandan government wants you to go far. But you're not a meta. You're not something that anyone in the world can get involved in and use. And that's why I guess some of these companies, the TikToks of the world, are so valuable, because they are also mass market. Do you think that your disadvantage because of the fact that you're not mass market will just make your journey so much harder? Yeah. And maybe we're asking too much of Irembo. We're asking too much of a company that's fundamentally a public sector company, and that will never be something that someone uses to communicate with their friends?
Yeah. I think e-commerce, social media, and those kind of things that are really consumer capturing have tremendous potential in terms of capturing markets and be able to grow out of whatever bounds we can ever imagine for ourselves. But there are companies that are comparable to us that work in similar industries that you probably never hear about. You can think of Salesforce, you can think of ServiceNow, you can think of Palantir if you think of the Silicon Valley North American ecosystem. You can think of the largest, Wiz, a cybersecurity company outside of Israel, and so on. These are companies that they don't sell to consumers. They are not mass market, if you want. They sell to other businesses. They sell to government. And they build technology that empower those. And they are able to reach the scale to be unicorn-like. Not Facebook type of scale, but they can get to a maximum to maximize the value it is that they have. And so we usually compare ourselves to that in terms of market. And then when you come to the idea that we started in the government business, or what we call GovTech essentially, and whether there is enough potential in that space, I think we are extremely privileged because in Rwanda there is always that drive. It's like usually you, the technologist, you are slower than the ambition of the government. And so we are always in some form of catch up to the ambition. But in other markets, they are where we were 10 years ago. And they are looking at us to actually drive them. They are looking at us to actually show them the way. And we capitalize on that potential and that ability to deliver on a new form of value that they've never seen or imagined. And so we think there is the opportunity, we think there is the ability, we think it's innovation. I never like to see it as a challenge, as asking too much, but as an innovator, you always sit back and ask yourself, what does it take to be able to do that? From an innovation perspective, from operations, implementation and execution, from sales, from relationship building, from vision crafting and being able to get the buy-in for that. And so that's really what we work on a regular basis. And every roadblock of some sort is kind of gets us to think of what it is that we do differently. How do we creatively address a certain challenge in that space? Yeah.
You're 10 years old now. Now let's look at the next 10 years.
Right.
My last set of questions for you will be about the future outlook for the company. And I personally believe that as Irembo goes, so does the Rwandan economy. Because we are not going to have many, I personally don't think that we're going to have many unicorns. So if you end up doing well and becoming that unicorn, as you talk about, that will be a huge driver for the rest of the economy. So if you guys do well, so will the rest of us. So let's talk about the future now.
Yeah.
First question that I'd like to ask is, do you see this Irembo platform as we see it today? Do you think it will be more? It will give do you see it being more than what we now use? Do you see yourselves, for example, maybe diversifying? Right? Like fundamentally, you talk about, you have a whole bunch of engineers, very, very smart people. It might make sense, for example, to maybe diversify and, you've become so good at, for example, cybersecurity.
Yeah.
Why not create another Kaspersky?
Okay.
What kind, are you looking to do that, or are you kind of like saying, this is who we are. For the next 10 years, all we'll do is focus on this, or are you looking at diversifying?
Yeah.
The products and the offerings, or even diversifying the company?
Yeah. Allow me to first speak on what you said around you don't believe that there could be another unicorn in our market. If there is one thing the technology industry and ecosystem has taught us over the last 30, 40, 50 years is to never make such statement, because you never know who can create what and the amount of value that they can extract out of it. And for me, I have a deep belief in the engineers, in the creators, in the entrepreneurs who are out there, who are dreaming and trying to bring things to life. And my hope and my belief is that one of them, two of them can get on something that we have never thought of, never imagined, totally made in Rwanda, and really catch the world by storm. And I'm here for it, essentially, and hopefully in our lifetime. Of course, I'm their biggest competitor, so we'll try and be the first there, but I just have so much belief in the ecosystem and people who can create. Now, back to us and what it is that we are trying to get to. I think, first of all, you have to understand, what are we doing now? What is important, and is our job done, right? In purely the experience that you as a citizen have. And we always think about it like maybe we have 5 milestones that you have to achieve just for you. And then I'll talk about what could be seen as diversification if you want. But the first of all is, today you only interact with Irembo. You come and apply either yourself or through an agent. And it's a transaction. It goes through and that's it. What we've done over the last 10 years is really doing that, putting all the services online. The second milestone that we try to do is, how do you refine them so that they work really well for everyone, and so that they kind of what we call business process re-engineering. So sometimes a service is not working well, or it's too much requirement, it's big. So we simplify those kind of things. And now the third one is asking yourself, after you've put the service online, done the business process re-engineering to simplify them, why do you need to go through 2 or 3 institutions? And usually that's where we ask ourselves is, are we the starting point of your journey, or are we in the middle, or are we the ending point, right? Sometimes you want a birth certificate to go get a loan. You want a birth certificate to go apply, come back on Irembo to apply for a passport. You want so on and so forth. So we always try to say, okay, when we get there now, how do we do what we call a whole of government and whole of industry service delivery, right? Where you, the consumer, you go where you want the service. The industry and government figure out how to get everything else. And that's is underpinned by the fact that we have great foundational technology, mostly by governments that they invested in the National ID Registry, the Land Registry, the Motor Vehicle Registry, and so on and so forth. What those allow you to do is, it's digitized, it's accessible, it can be used, and up to us to do that. Whether you are applying for a bank loan, the bank shouldn't ask you to go to Irembo to get this or that. It should be easy. If you are applying for a service at this institution, it should be easy. Whether you're a citizen or a business, it should be easy. So that's the third milestone, and I would say that's what we are starting to work on now, where you have that experience of, I just don't do 2-3 steps. It's the idea of zero trip, zero paper, and true digitization. Now, the last milestone is really, the last 2 milestones are around you, the individual. Sometimes we have to ask ourselves, why do you even apply on Irembo in the first place? And the idea is, how do we know you well enough that we get to you way before you need to get to us? And that's what foundational technologies like the digital ID and others will allow us to do as they come to life. And that's, for example, if a baby is born, you just give them a passport, you just give them a health card, you just give them a birth certificate, and their parents don't need to apply for that, because everything was built so you can authenticate that. And I think the last bit I can talk in between there is the logic. We always, when you apply for something, someone has to assess, is it worth it? Does this person deserve this? And then they have some form of a logic that they follow to give you any particular document. We are at a big scale. Before, maybe just 100 of us would want a particular document, permit or certificate. Now it's 10 times the scale. As the economy grows, those things grow. So that logic could be automated. It could be, highly autonomous, so that the person who's involved in doing so can spend their time doing more interesting work rather than spending the full day just kind of going through it. It's really mimicking the signing that we tried to get away from. And so how do we also digitize that part and leave that professional to do much more interesting work? So that's just in the government space and government services. It's a lot of work to be done in that space and a lot of technology to be built there. Now, secondly, is you ask yourself, okay, you've done this for Rwandans, where else? And that's where we are thinking of, there are so many other countries across the continent who are trying to start this journey. Instead of choosing technology providers from Estonia, from Europe, from other places, can we be the technology partner of choice? And so that's kind of what it is that we are working on right now.
Where are you going right now?
I think you probably saw recently we signed an MOU with Guinea-Conakry, so there's a conversation that are ongoing. And then there are many other countries that are different stages of conversation. And it takes time, so nothing conclusive yet.
But then you're obviously identifying some markets. Can you share with us those markets?
We are in a competitive space, so I want to make sure that even if I understand that your audience could be limited, but I'm pretty sure someone is trying to understand where Irembo is at, and so, but at different stages of conversation with different countries.
And those countries, when they listen to your pitch,
yeah,
how do they react to it?
I think one of the things we are learning is sometimes we pitch to countries in today's sense. We have to think of where were we 10 years ago when this dream started here in Rwanda, and often than not, we go back to there and realize most countries are back there. And so I think one of the things that they get is all the capacity that you can do to, first of all, really eliminate corruption and eliminate inefficiencies in how government provides services. Number three, it's extend and build so much trust with citizens by digitizing most of the services and make it very, very accessible. And really having that one-stop platform where you can access everything, reducing red tape, and fast track the process of which it is that you are doing. I think some government officials tell us how they feel like just because they are slow at processing passports for their citizens, they are probably not competitive enough in the global competition landscape. Whereas some countries will get their best, citizen traveling the world and accessing opportunities and creating interesting things. So there is the thinking around both the efficiency locally. There is also the thinking around how do we build an ecosystem where the government is really not the one that's blocking people from maximizing their potential in a way by speeding up that process. So there is a lot of that. And then some governments, some institutions are really focused on how do we have clarity on what it is that we make. If we are issuing permits and licenses, if we are issuing traffic fines, if we are doing this, how do we know that it's the right amount, the trend is daily, because those things are done very manually. And you cannot tally it from across the country. And remember, these countries will tend to be 3-4 times larger than ours. And so they want better structures, better data, better system to inform policy making, to inform decision making. So across the boards, the value that they see varies so much. And so for us, it's now, how do we think of the best way to get started, to tailor what it is that we've done in a way. So that's where we are at. With those countries. And that's the second part of what it is that we are doing. Earlier, I told you that we have a payment gateway, and Irembo Pay is sort of a fintech of its own that allows people to receive money online. So businesses, merchants, any entrepreneur who has created an online business can accept money and payments. And if you are interacting with any business, you have an easier way to pay that is the most convenient for you as a consumer. That's part of our strategy to say, what is the technology that we've built that we are kind of just limiting to government? How can we transfer that technology also in the private space?
You're talking about Irembo Pay. And actually, it's quite interesting to me. Is Irembo Pay kind of like Alipay or any of these like payment platforms that people can then use to receive money, or is it something that is totally different?
So the best way to explain to you, usually you go in a restaurant, maybe a restaurant is a good analogy, but not the best, and they have POS machines, and then they have something to show this is our Momo code. They have another thing to show this is our Airtel code, and then there is a cash registry as well, so someone will take your cash. What happens for that restaurant is whichever you choose to use, in the background, they have to try and figure out how to bring this together. They have to remember that this person bought this particular good and they paid with this way, and this is where I can track and trace it. But when you enter your card or when you pay with Momo, you don't enter that information at all. There is no place where you say, oh, I'm paying 5,000 because I bought this soda. So what we are doing with Irembo Pay is solving that kind of information problem that the restaurant would have by kind of aggregating all the forms of ways that you can pay so that the consumer pay however they want. Then the business owner kind of sees everything agnostic of how and where this payment came from and from which currency that this payment came from. And for you, the consumer, is no one will ever tell you, oh, this POS is down, or network is off or something. You have choice and you have options, and you can, if today you brought your card, you can pay with card. If today you want to do Momo, you can pay with Momo. If you have cash, you pay with cash. But for them, they don't go through the hassle of how their business is doing or daily reconciliation and so on. And so it's much more interesting for online businesses because there is not an interface there.
I mean, one of the biggest problems that we've had with, say, some of these online businesses that, say, for example, use PayPal, especially in Africa,
correct,
is that, one, some of these platforms don't work in the continent, yes, or they think that us Africans are fraudsters, so they'll refuse to give us money when you're trying to withdraw. Is that kind of where you're looking at?
Exactly. So that's where we are looking at and kind of solving that particular payment problem. It's a big kind of space, if you want to imagine. And so where we are studying is very niche. It's mostly for online businesses, online entrepreneurs, solving that problem. But the problem itself is quite big and vast, and hopefully we will have the capacity to address that as well.
And you're going to launch it when?
Very soon. We are now licensed by the National Bank and sort of kind of lining up new partners. But anyone who's interested in it, we are happy to talk to them about how it works. But today, it works because that's how you pay for government services. That's how people pay for visa when they arrive at the airport. That's how they pay for traffic fines. So it actually operates. And I told you earlier, we are doing over 400 million of Rwandan francs on a daily basis, at least around that space. So, yeah.
Last question.
Yes, please.
It seems like Irembo is doing great things, and it seems that it will continue to do great things in the future if we are to believe what you've told us, whether it's with the payment platform and all these other ambitions of expansion and even doing what you do even better. So it sounds like there's going to be a lot of money to be made for your investors, the two investors. I feel that allowing those two investors to enjoy the benefits of your growth would be selfish. There's the thing of, there's a saying of sharing is caring.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the possibility of an IPO, an initial public offering.
Yeah.
Do you, within those 10 years, when you look 10 years down the line, do you see a time when it will stop being kind of that private company and Irembo will start becoming a publicly traded company where people, Rwandans, can not just use the platform, but also buy shares in the platform and also earn dividends from the growth of the company.
Absolutely. I think why companies do go for IPO is usually because they have to tap into new sources of capital, mostly from the public. And also the existing shareholders feel like they want to make money out of it because of they have different investment portfolio and strategies that they are applying for. And trust me, with all these ambitions, we are putting quite a lot of pressure on our shareholders to continuously invest in us as much as we have the ability to grow and scale, but it's always limited in terms of resources you have. So we always we want to do this thing with AI. Can you give us a couple of millions? And they're like, no, we don't have that money. And so usually that's when the conversation starts.
And that's millions of dollars, not millions of euros.
And so you ask, okay, then we have the conversation of where else can we get that capital? And that means we can, go to the public markets and get that. So definitely something that we foresee. And also always has to align with our shareholders and what it is that they're also thinking about with regards to their portfolio. And it would be a tremendous kind of milestone for our ecosystem, for our tech ecosystem, but also a great advancement in terms of just the public to engage with companies like ours, read our books, see what is happening, and understand the potential that we have compared to what I would say industry-leading kind of traditional markets that companies that are already listed today. So we're looking forward to that. What we do today is kind of how do we build the institutional capacity to be any form of company, to be multi-shareholder company, to be public company, to have to disclose so much about our business, about information. It takes a lot of institutional growth and capacity building, and we are in the process of that. And it's always exciting to feel like you are at the position where that's what you start to work on. And everyone usually is kind of excited to see where that goes. But yeah.
Something that you said just kind of created a question in my head. The better you do as a company, the more competitive your workers become.
Correct.
Right? Because obviously your engineers are doing better.
Yeah.
And the more, it's like football.
Yeah.
Real Madrid, right? It's a multi-billion-dollar football club. Mm-hmm. It grows because it continuously buys. It sees a young man, Jude Bellingham, and sees how well he's doing in Dortmund and says, I will pay Dortmund for this talent. Yeah. And because they keep some of these clubs, they keep losing their best players, they never then become they never reach the same potential that they could have reached because there's that constant turnover in terms of skills and talent. Don't you worry that if you do really, really well, you'll end up being unable to reach a certain level of growth simply because someone will come, Microsoft, comes to one of your engineers and says, you're really good at this, come over. And then you end up having to then go back into the local market, hire a junior engineer, and you can never just keep growing because you're just constantly losing talent.
Yeah. I'll speak to that, but maybe your audience can benefit from understanding the fact that how it works in technology companies is when you're an engineer, when you're an early employee, usually the company doesn't have enough to pay you. It cannot match your market rate, essentially. And what they would do is they make you part shareholder. That's what most people will hear is share options. How do you compensate someone with money? And then you also give them the ability to own and buy shares from the company. Or they can give you some form of incentive payment based on the value that you deliver for the company. It could be revenue sharing. It could be like some form of a dividend to employees if you want. Those are all tactics that technology companies like ours have, so that you continuously hang on or incentivize those engineers to kind of continue contributing to this. The risk of those people going to better companies is very real. In the last 2-3 years, Irembo has lost employees to Google in Germany, to Microsoft in Kenya, and others go to Germany as well, to the US and many other places. Even the local ecosystem, some of our engineers can go to a local company. Our engineers can go create companies themselves. So there is a lot of that could be happening. I don't think we would want to worry from that a lot. And usually you build an organization to hedge against that in terms of how you store information, like how you manage the knowledge and the ability to do something. Then from an ecosystem perspective is how do we have a critical mass of engineers so that such problems never become like something that is really a big problem. I think there is a balance you can reach of people going and people coming and the amount of knowledge that they build. So for example, we invest a lot in internships so that we can build that pipeline for ourselves because we know it's inevitable. And we know that your growth can be capped to a certain level in our company, but we have to always have the pipeline that comes in. And we now have incredible universities and training institutions across the country that are training really good engineers who come in, and in less than 2 years, they're at the senior level and can deliver on so much value. So it allows us to have that, and it's a critical mass. The entire ecosystem can share enough. It's usually hard to get to that, but it's a risk, but we have to respond to it. And we try to be very, very intentional in terms of how much we do from retention. The first thing, like, is the work really, really valuable? Are you feeling like you are making an impact? Do you have enough autonomy? Are you creating enough? Are you using the latest technology? Are you compensated competitively? But then also it's like, sometimes someone will really surpass you on all of those, and you have to have that pipeline coming in and other strategies that we try to use in the place. And many of those are also ecosystem-wide that we share with many other players in the ecosystem, and you can see that we are doing quite well.
Israel, thank you so much for joining me on the long form.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate that.
This conversation has really enlightened me about some of the work that you do, your ambitions. And I'm personally really excited to see, especially Irembo Pay, what it will do in terms of allowing local companies, local brands to tap into the e-commerce world.
Yeah.
That's so important.
Absolutely, and that's just the beginning. We hope to do a lot more in that space.
All right, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me over.
If you enjoyed the conversation today, share your thoughts with us on our social media platforms. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok.